I was Clara Jensen, all of 22 years old and living in Riverside, Illinois, a town where the pace was a little slower, the people a little friendlier, and the small businesses really mattered. My world revolved around textbooks and serving tables. I was in nursing school, which meant most of my waking hours were spent either memorizing anatomy or hustling plates of pasta at the Copper Spoon, a beloved local restaurant. It wasn't fancy, but it had a warmth to it, a hum of happy chatter, and a staff that felt more like a quirky family. We didn't advertise, not a single flyer or newspaper ad. Our reputation rested entirely on word of mouth, on the genuine experiences people had with our food and our service. That was our pride and our secret to staying busy, even on a Tuesday night. I'd been there for several months, long enough to know the menu inside and out, long enough to anticipate a customer's needs before they even knew them, and long enough to be one of the trusted veterans who quietly helped new hires find their footing. It wasn't my official job to train, but I always kept an eye out, offering a quick tip or a reassuring smile when someone looked overwhelmed. That night, my shift partner was one of those new hires. He was an older gentleman, probably in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, and he had a kind face, a little bit shy, a little bit awkward, and clearly nervous about making mistakes. He was a sweet guy, and I admired him for taking on a new challenge at his age. It was his very first night with his own section, a whole set of tables to manage on his own. I knew he'd be in the weeds, as we called it, a flurry of orders and requests, but I was ready to jump in and support him just as I always did. His section was right next to mine, a perfect spot for me to keep a discreet watch. Everything was going fairly well until a table of six arrived, a group of people who looked to be in their mid-20s, and right away their energy felt off. There was one woman in particular sitting at the head of the table who radiated an air of entitlement. I could feel it from my own section. A few minutes later, I saw the new waiter approaching me, his brow furrowed with confusion and a hint of panic. He whispered, "They want something that isn't on the menu. This woman, she says we have the ingredients and should just make it, that the other location makes it all the time." My first instinct was to tell him to stand his ground, to explain that we couldn't just whip up custom dishes on demand, but then I looked at his face. He was already so anxious, and it was his first night flying solo. This wasn't the moment for a lesson in assertiveness. Sometimes you just needed a win, so I told him to check with the kitchen staff to see if they were willing to make it. It was just a wrap, if I remembered correctly, something simple enough for them to probably handle without much fuss. If the kitchen said no, I promised I would go over and talk to the table myself. He hurried off, and a few minutes later he returned, a small sigh of relief escaping him. The cooks had agreed. From our side, there was no problem. But that small concession, that moment of going above and beyond, seemed to be the signal for the demanding woman at the table to unleash her full barrage of requests. It was relentless. Every single time the poor waiter brought something to their table, she immediately needed something else. As soon as he delivered their drinks, she needed appetizers. When he brought the appetizers, she needed to change her entree order. It was a constant barrage designed, it seemed, to keep him in a perpetual state of motion and stress. I watched my frustration growing with each new demand. I saw his panicked eyes scanning the dining room, looking for me for any sign of help. I gave him a subtle nod, a silent promise that I was there. I started incorporating his other tables into my own routine, checking on them, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, anything to lighten his load and give him a moment to breathe. This continued throughout their entire meal, a seemingly endless cycle of rudeness and impatience from the woman. She demanded his full attention with zero apology, zero kindness, zero recognition that he was a human being trying his best. During a quick moment in the back, I caught him and tried to prepare him for the very real possibility of a low or even no tip from that table. I wanted to calm his panic, to remind him that it wasn't a reflection of his service, but of their unkindness. I also made sure to tell him that I wouldn't be touching the tips from his other tables, so at least those would be his entirely. Honestly, this poor man looked like he was on the verge of quitting right there on the spot. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes darted around nervously, and his hands trembled slightly as he carried trays. This woman, this leader of the table, was systematically breaking him down piece by piece. She was rude, impatient, and gave him no space to think, let alone catch his breath. I truly felt like his emotional support animal at that point, trying to prop him up, to absorb some of the negativity she was throwing his way. The fact that he was at least twice my age made it even worse somehow. He shouldn't have to endure this kind of treatment. The table had arrived late in the evening, closer to our section's closing time, and they had managed to stretch their meal past when we were officially supposed to be done. They were the last table left on our side of the restaurant, a dubious perk of closing with a new waiter. Sometimes it meant getting cut early, but tonight it meant this prolonged torment. That's when he came to me with a new, even more perplexing question. "How do I do an employee discount?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. And they want to use more than one on a single ticket. Is that okay? I stared at him, my mind trying to process what he'd just said, employee. What did he mean, employee? My confusion quickly turned into a cold knot of dread as he began to explain. The woman, the leader, had spent the entire meal not just demanding special treatment, but actively berating him, making fun of him, and belittling his service. She claimed she was a trainer at our other location, and that he was the worst waiter she had ever seen in her life. She used this supposed status as an excuse for her special meal requests, for her constant interruptions, for her general air of superiority. No wonder the other location always made her special meals, she'd said, and it was no surprise at all that he was such a wreck, she'd sneered. On top of all that, she was now claiming there were multiple birthdays in her group, demanding free cakes for everyone and an immediate birthday song. To say I was livid would be like saying lava is just warm. My blood was boiling, every ounce of my calm, composed waitress persona shattered. I was ready to throw hands, to march over there and tell her exactly what I thought of her despicable behavior, but then I took a deep breath. Hurting her physically wouldn't solve anything, and it would put my job and possibly his at risk, I had to think. A plan began to form, a much more satisfying kind of retribution. I told him to prep the birthday cakes, all of them, but not to take them out yet. I would go get the boss about the employee discount. The truth was, we could process employee discounts ourselves, but this was such a special case it warranted a higher authority. And I would gather the other workers for the birthday song. Our managers at the Copper Spoon were absolutely amazing. They were the kind of bosses you rarely found in the restaurant industry, supportive, fair, and fiercely protective of their staff. We loved each one of them, and every single one of them had our backs. This in itself was almost the best part of working there. I found the front-end manager, Sarah, a woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart of gold. I quickly, succinctly, and with a simmering rage that I usually kept hidden, gave her a rundown of the table's antics, focusing on the woman's claims of being a trainer and her abusive behavior towards our new waiter. I reminded Sarah of our restaurant's core philosophy, our sacred word-of-mouth reputation. Sarah's face hardened. She was not having it. A restaurant employee, especially one claiming to be a trainer, acting with such cruelty and entitlement, was an absolute affront to everything we stood for, even if she wasn't technically one of her employees. I then, with a barely contained grin, asked her permission for what I wanted to do. Sarah listened, a slow smile spreading across her face. She nodded, a gleam in her eyes, giving me full permission. As she grabbed the employee numbers the woman had given for the discounts, which that trainer should have known could not be stacked on a single ticket, much less claimed by multiple people, she told me she had a boss-to-boss phone call to make. This was getting good. I ran to every employee I could find, which was a fair number since half the restaurant was closing down. There were servers, busboys, even the dishwasher, all within earshot. I gave them the fastest, most urgent explanation of the table and my plan. Their reactions ranged from wide-eyed disbelief to a shared sense of righteous indignation. We were a team and someone was messing with one of our own. Then I went back to the poor, nerve-wracked new server. I clapped him gently on the shoulder, a smile on my face that held a hint of mischief. "We're ready to drop cakes," I announced. The crowd that arrived at that six-person tabletop was, honestly, the largest we had ever assembled for a birthday song. I am pretty confident it was the largest that restaurant will ever have before or since. We placed a free cake in front of every single seat, a silent testament to the woman's greed. The leader of the table, her face aglow with a smug, self-satisfied smirk, watched as we all grinned ecstatically and lined up around their table ready to sing. And oh, did we sing. We all sang that birthday song, every single one of us, as loud as humanly possible. Our voices, usually a pleasant murmur in the background, became a roaring wave of sound. Please recall, they were the very last table in that section, and for your imagination, I should mention this particular table was tucked into a deep corner. So as we were screaming the birthday song at the top of our lungs, the sound didn't just carry, it bounced back from that corner, amplifying, echoing, and reverberating. It became an excruciatingly long song, each syllable stretched out, each note held with a theatrical intensity that was borderline painful. Their smiles, so smug just moments before, dropped immediately. Their eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in discomfort. Hands shot up to cover their ears as they literally jumped, startled by the sheer audio onslaught. I know it hurt my ears, and that delicious pain is something that still makes me smile to this very day. We all stood there, a giant group of restaurant staff, happily screaming our restaurant's special, extra-long happy birthday song, a chorus of collective vengeance, and it still warms my heart a decade later to remember it. More than that, while we were gathering and planning and destroying eardrums with our celebratory shouts, our boss, Sarah, was making those promised phone calls in the office. Yes, she absolutely called the woman's restaurant manager and informed them of her atrocious behavior, of her false claims, and of her appalling treatment of another human being. And no, the woman didn't get her stacked employee discounts. In fact, she didn't get any discount at all. I know because I was there standing near the host desk when she was handed the phone from my front-end manager. I saw her face go pale, then blotchy red. I watched as she started to cry, trying to make her pathetic excuses, trying to argue why she shouldn't be fired, but it was too late. The general manager, a step below the owner since this was a small company with very few locations, had already been called. Her employee number had been shared. Her despicable behavior had been thoroughly documented. And she was done. I'm not psychic, of course. She could have gone back to her home location and convinced someone to hire her back. Anything is possible in this unpredictable world. But I know how she treated that poor new waiter, that kind, nervous man. I know the tale I told to my boss, and I know the quiet rage Sarah so rarely touched, but when it was unleashed, it was absolute, cold, and unwavering. I would have almost given up joining in that screaming song just to be able to hear those phone calls, to hear the calm, professional way Sarah dismantled that woman's career. But seeing her face, hearing her cries, that was a pretty good consolation prize. As for the new waiter, he flourished after that night. He eventually became one of our best, and for me, Clara Jensen, it was a profound lesson in standing up for what's right, even if it means raising your voice literally to be heard. The Copper Spoon continued its tradition of excellence, a place where genuine hospitality was paramount and where sometimes justice was served with a side of really loud birthday cake.